So, before we get into the video, let me say something about this review. I usually put a lot of effort into the editing of my reviews, trying to match gameplay footage with what I'm saying. This video is not really like that though. It's more of a podcast with some generic Silksong gameplay footage in the background. The review does follow a structure, but it's more like a collection of thoughts than a traditional critique, and that's why I chose this more free-form, loose format. If that's cool with you, I hope you can enjoy this video nonetheless. So, sit back, relax, put this on your second monitor or whatever, and let's get into the actual review. How the hell is this game real? That is the question that kept popping into my head while making my way through this marvelous game that is Silksong. The character design is peak, the background graphics are jaw-droppingly gorgeous, the animation is slick, the combat is polished to a shine, the story is engaging, the themes touched upon are profound, and all that for the price of a pizza? How? Like, why? What's the catch here? Honestly, I started playing Silksong expecting to be disappointed. I know how unfair that is. It's just, the first Hollow Knight was only a good game for me. I had fun with that game, it was kind of fine. But the hype surrounding it? I never really got that. I didn't like the level design all that much, the backtracking was kind of a pain, many areas just looked super similar, which made navigation kind of a mess for me. On top of that, the game had the gall to make me pay for basic gameplay functionality like maps, and even made me buy and equip an item to show myself on that map. How dare they? Funnily enough, Silksong does many of these things too, and in some cases it even goes one step further, but for some reason I just don't mind it as much. At first, still having to pay for fundamental game mechanics really kinda pissed me off here. You pay for maps, you pay for individual markers on your maps. You still have to equip a compass, which takes away an item slot pretty much permanently for me. You even have to pay for most checkpoints and fast travel options like, brother, a bug's gotta eat too, you know? Especially in the beginning of Silksong, resource management can therefore absolutely be a pain in the ass. You have two kinds of currency now. Shards that you keep even through death and that are consumed by using tools, and rosary beads that you lose upon death and that work as the main currency in most shops. I always had the maximum amount of shards available. I know people are complaining about not having enough of them to use tools, but I was always packed with these things. Now, rosaries on the other hand are a different story. During the early hours, I was hoarding these as best I could, but I was still only barely scraping by. Everything was so expensive. I remember thinking to myself what the point of this very restrictive design decision was. I thought maybe it was to facilitate player choice. You have to make choices in the beginning a lot as to how to spend your hard-earned rosaries, but you know what? I really don't think it's an interesting player decision whether to buy a map or a checkpoint. At least checkpoints should just be free in my opinion. I can totally see someone running into that downward spiral of not being able to afford a checkpoint, dying, losing all the money they had on the way to the next checkpoint, dying again, and so on and so forth. Eventually, things get a little more manageable, but I totally understand players being frustrated with this in the early hours of the game. And yet, when I read that people had to go out of their way to actually grind for resources, I simply cannot relate to that. Like, I don't want to sound like a pretentious guy, like, oh, I actually never had to grind for anything because I simply never died in the first place. Have you considered to maybe get good? I'm I'm not that kind of guy, but the honest truth is that I just never had to grind, and I could still afford all the neat little trinkets I wanted. It's just what it is. Something I did struggle with was the level of difficulty though, and I think I'm not the only one here. YouTube alone is filled with reviews complaining about overtuned boss battles, the difficulty in general, how unfair everything is, and so on. So let's take a breather and break it down a bit, shall we? Combat in Silksong is tough, like really tough. Normal enemies can kick your ass just as easily as bosses can. Getting from point A to B is always a challenge, and you have to pay close attention to your surroundings, or else, these guys will get to you. Even the smallest bug running free in the wild can pose a serious threat to our beloved protagonist Hornet if you act careless. In a way, this does feel very quote-unquote Souls, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. Now, once you have overcome the hardships on your way to the next boss, the real fun begins. I have to admit that I was genuinely shocked by some of the boss's designs. I remember the first Hollow Knight being a challenging game. However, even in the late game, I never had to try to defeat a boss more than a handful of times. In Silksong, this is no longer the case. Bosses are the main challenge here. All of them come with a multitude of moves, most of them are extremely versatile, and they all kick your butt when you slip up. You start with 5 health points this time that are represented by these masks, and most boss attacks, even contact damage, take away 2 HP with 1 hit. I think this design decision is indeed kind of ridiculous. First, it makes the first hard-earned health upgrade pretty much useless. I mean, you still die in 3 hits anyway. And secondly, it makes me wonder why the game didn't simply start with something like 3 max HP, but only 1 damage per hit. You could still have special boss attacks with 2 damage like in the first game, but to make 2 damage the norm is just kind of inconceivable to me. Another issue I take with the boss design is the fact that many of them summon additional enemies to add an extra layer of challenge. I personally find that really lame. I prefer well-designed and challenging one-on-one encounters, and I simply despise the randomness introduced via additional enemies. However, I can also see how dropping more enemies into a boss arena adds a certain spice to some fights, a certain unpredictability that some players might enjoy. I, however, don't. To give an early game example for this, let us consider the fight against the infamous Savage Beastfly. In essence, this is a straightforward encounter against a versatile enemy that has a handful of moves that are, in principle, very manageable. However, after some time has passed, this big ugly fly starts summoning additional enemies. It is not unlikely to face up to 3 additional enemies at a time. This itself is not an issue in my opinion. You are now forced to focus on multiple things on the screen. You have to take extra care about your positioning, and it is simply not enough to keep wailing on the boss like a madman. This is cool, but it can lead to unfair situations. Not only did I find it near impossible to deal with 4 enemies, all with their own AI and behavior at a time, on top of that, on occasion, the game put me in tight situations and left me no options to deal with it properly. For the fight against Savage Beastfly, it so happened that enemies kept coming towards me on the ground, in the air slightly above the ground, as well as high up in the air. All of these 3 lanes, if you will, were occupied by enemies, and I literally had nowhere to go. A hit was unfortunately guaranteed here, and it did not feel deserved. To make matters worse, there is yet another combat-related problem I have identified that becomes particularly apparent during boss battles, and that is the sometimes questionable hitboxes. As we all know, Hornet fights with a needle, and I have distinct images in my head of that needle being displayed in front of the boss's sprite, but not hitting the boss itself. You can probably imagine how frustrating it is to see, even to know that you hit the boss, but the hitbox just refuses to register that hit. Admittedly, this didn't happen all that often, but when it did, it was all the more annoying, especially considering that Hornet's hitbox on the other hand seems rather huge sometimes, with enemies hitting her when you feel like they really shouldn't have been able to. You know, while we are here bitching about all the things that I disliked about the combat, let's also quickly address something that I feel has been talked about to death already: runbacks. For many players, this seems to be a huge deal, having to run back to a boss after dying for a very long time. I do agree that there are instances where this is an issue, and where the game absolutely leaves the challenging territory and enters the annoying zone. Yes, I am talking about that big, fat, ugly frog face, but there are a couple of other instances throughout the game as well. Runbacks in and of themselves aren't the issue here, but the way they are designed is. There's simply nothing interesting going on my way to the boss. I'm not learning anything here. I'm not preparing for the fight in any way, it's simply padding. So, with all of that out of the way and under consideration of all factors included, I come to the conclusion that many players have come to as well. Silksong's combat sucks. Yeah, alright, who am I kidding? You read the title of this video, you know what's up. And it's true, I friggin' love the combat in this game, despite all the nagging that I just did. Why is that? Well, it's actually really simple. Every single enemy, from the small ones to the big ones, poses a fun challenge. They are hard, but they are fair. It is true that summoning additional enemies can lead to situations that feel anything but fair. It is also true that some hitboxes simply aren't functional in a way they should be. However, what I love about the combat is how it promotes and rewards positioning. You can't simply iframe through everything, and thus you really have to take into account your position with regards to the enemies around you. That is a challenge I rarely find in modern games anymore, and it is something that I love Silksong for. I remember very clearly another rather recent game that also focused a lot on challenging combat design. Elden Ring: Shadow of the Erdtree. I did not in any way enjoy how difficulty was achieved in that game, since fighting bosses felt neither fun nor fair to me. Delaying attacks in unnatural ways, one-shot attacks, endless combos, you know the drill. Silksong has none of that, because it doesn't need these cheesy ways to artificially increase difficulty. Enemy attacks are always well telegraphed, combos do exist, but they don't go on forever, one-shots are simply not a part of this game at all, and thus learning a fight actually feels fun again. Who would have thought? Seriously, after struggling so much with Shadow of the Erdtree, I thought that maybe I just wasn't enjoying hard games anymore. Maybe, I thought, I had gotten too old for this kind of reaction-based combat? I am over 30 after all. Silksong made me realize how foolish that thought was. I am very old, true, but I still very much enjoy a good challenge if it is designed well, and oh boy, that is the case here. There are so many memorable fights in this game, and it is nigh impossible for me to determine my favorite one. There's a fight against a certain singer that I can't get out of my head for how much I love that one, but it is merely one of many, many brilliantly designed encounters. This game has the sauce, dude. The good old dance of death is back, and it's more beautiful than ever before. Progress feels earned. Victory feels like an actual achievement. In Shadow of the Erdtree, when the fight was over, I was just relieved that it was finally done. Here, I felt accomplished, and I enjoyed every step of the way to get there. It's true that there may be 1 or 2 bosses that drag on for a bit too long, and that some of the enemy gauntlet sections are a bit overtuned, but these are the exceptions rather than the rule. On a fundamental level, combat in Silksong is stellar. Besides combat, Silksong excels in another area that is a crucial aspect in the Metroidvania genre, platforming. Movement in Silksong is so precise, man. When I first launched the game and I saw that the good old downward slash from the first game had been turned into a diagonal one, I was kinda skeptical. After all, I loved pogoing my way through the most dangerous situations in the first game, and I feared that this would no longer be a viable tactic with this new moveset. It admittedly took a little getting used to, but when it clicked, it clicked. I had a blast making my way through the early game platforming challenges like that. Eventually, you do unlock a whole bunch of other movesets via so-called crests that you can just switch between. These not only change the entire way of how you approach the combat, but they also give you different options with regards to your movement. If you want, you can find and equip a crest that gives you the traditional downward slash, but you can also go for something more wild, like the beast mode for instance, and make the platforming sections extra hard for you. It's all up to you. As the game went on, Silksong threw one excruciating platforming challenge after the other at me. I never finished the Path of Pain in the first game, but I can't imagine it being so much worse than all the stuff that I had to go through here. Honestly, some of these sections are utterly insane. There's no other word of putting it. Where in the first game the hardest platforming challenges were kept optional, here you absolutely have to complete some crazy segments to make progress in the main game. Yet again, as with the bosses, I loved everything about this. Yes, it's tough. Sometimes it feels outright unfair when Hornet dashes straight into a saw blade and you feel like you should have bumped off of it, but the game decided to crush your bones instead, but it was never enough to frustrate me. As with the bosses, with every death I learned something new. With every death, I didn't feel anger, but encouragement. And again, I would feel truly accomplished upon completing a challenge. You know what else I really didn't love about the first Hollow Knight? Exploration. Don't get me wrong, the world of the first game with its ominous undertones, the weird bug guys, the permeating dread, that was absolutely my jam, but the level design itself, both in terms of structure, but also in terms of visual identity, was really kind of lacking. I remember roaming these caves, thinking to myself, well, this is kinda boring actually. Everything looks the same. Now, of course, not everything looked the same, but it nonetheless all merged together in my head. There's little to no area in the first game that left an impression on me, except maybe the City of Tears. Silksong improves on that drastically. Areas have a distinct identity now. Every single level has a vibe of its own that is fundamentally different from the others, maybe with the exception of 2 swamp areas that make Blighttown look like a jolly walk in the park. Finding new areas is always an adventure, and finding secret pathways into hidden regions of the world feels all the more exciting. It also helps that Silksong is simply drop-dead beautiful. There is a sort of ethereal beauty in all things, even more so than in the first game. As you ascend the Lens of Farloom, making your way towards the Citadel, you get a good idea of what this world is and what it once was. The world of Silksong is quite literally wrapped up in a sort of religious delusion. The threads woven by the gods that reside in the Citadel run deep, and all the inhabitants of Farloom are entangled in one way or another. You could also call it a theocratic fascist regime that has taken hold of these lands and its people. You cannot resist this. You join the cult, or you are eaten up by it. Some don't want to accept this reality and cling to a false hope that they will be saved through prayer and devotion. Some, like my favorite character in the entire game, Sharma, cannot accept this underlying darker truth and misinterpret the events surrounding them as a divine intervention or test for them to overcome. Some, like my other favorite character in the game, Garmund, are seeing right through the ruse and regard the regime for what it is: an oppressive force that needs to be fought and dismantled. Most people are simply trying to get by, building little settlements, holding on to the little that they have left. At last, some have become part of the machine, believing in a higher purpose, and thus kick down hard on their fellow brothers and sisters if they don't comply. And then there's you, Hornet, a person with a nebulous past, a mysterious heritage. Hornet herself is such an interesting character. In contrast to the knight in the first game, she is vocal about her thoughts and ideas. She actually talks to people, she debates, she has opinions. In short, she's an actual character with an actual personality. I love how Hornet is characterized here. She has a sassy side to her. She's confident and always wary when talking to someone new. Her arrival was prompted by an abduction after all. But she's also willing to open up. She's trusting if the person she's interacting with has proven trustworthy. There is another side to her, a side longing for domination. Throughout the game, you decide what side of her ultimately takes over. Kindness and empathy for these poor creatures, or the will to ascend and to wrestle control from the hands of the occupant to become the new occupant yourself. I hope I could make it somewhat clear why I love the world building and the character writing in this game so much. The game has this intricate way of touching on themes like religious zealotism and unwavering obedience by employing a clever metaphorical world building device: the threads that bind you physically but also mentally. It is about how to deal with these bindings, how to cut yourself and others free, both figuratively and literally. Hornet is much more compelling as a protagonist than the knight, and it is truly elegant how her character arc that involves genuine growth is written. For me, this was a story about empathy, about every being's right for freedom, but also about growth and overcoming one's inner demons and undesirable traits. I didn't expect the writing to hook me so, but it really left an impression on me. In general, I was much more involved with Farloom than with Hallownest. Part of that is due to the fact that weird things are happening all the time. The world is far from static, and it keeps surprising you with seemingly random events that keep things fresh. Sometimes an enemy will suddenly appear near the settlement. Sometimes, in good old Bloodborne fashion, you find yourself in a cage, taken to a prison. Oftentimes, you meet your little bug friendos along the way while they are on their own pilgrimage to the Citadel. Seriously, you meet new and old faces all the time, everywhere. Some of the best character moments are even completely optional. A questline may start with a random dude locked in a cage and end with one of the most beautiful and heart-wrenching scenes I have seen in a long time. All that is to say that the world feels dynamic. Going through the same area twice rarely feels the same. There's always something strange and new to discover, and it even made me enjoy the backtracking, which is just wild to me. I think at this point, this is pretty much all I have to say about this game. Silksong is a marvel. 7 years in the making, and you can absolutely tell. This year has been a bit of a bummer for me when it comes to new releases that I was hyped about. Clair Obscur was just a mediocre experience for me, even though I was really looking forward to that game. With Silksong, my expectations were lower as I don't love the first game, but the hype surrounding it swept me up as well, hence I bought it 2 days after release. Never ever did I believe for a second that I would fall in love with this game the way I have. I honestly thought that these hyped up, quote-unquote mainstream games just weren't for me anymore, but man, this game proved me wrong in all the best ways. I talked about all the things in which Silksong is flawed. Certain boss encounters, hitboxes, taking 2 damage with almost every hit, the resource management, and so on. The thing is, most of these things can be patched, and they already have been patched to an extent. The core of the game, however, is excellent. The world building is amazing, the characters are as lovely as can be, the combat is responsive and fluid, the controls are precise, the graphics and music are top tier, and you get all of that for €19.50, which is such a steal. That price is all the more laughable when you consider the myriad of content that Silksong provides. Besides the main progression that consists of fighting bosses and completing platforming challenges, there are a multitude of side quests, some really original ones, some less so. There are secret areas, collectibles, minigames, optional bosses, tools, crests, upgrades, just so much stuff. The way to unlocking the true ending alone is so packed with arguably the best parts of the game, and it is content that most players are unlikely to even see at all. Seriously, for the love of God, if you enjoy this game, at least try to get to the true ending. I implore you, there is so much good stuff here. Alright, enough gushing, let's wrap it up. Silksong is a challenging but fair, mesmerizingly beautiful and meticulously polished video game. It consumed my life for nearly 2 entire weeks. It made me feel deeply attached to its world and characters. It made me feel that thrill that I haven't felt since Dark Souls, and most remarkably, it made me fall in love with hard games again. All in all, Team Cherry made the right decisions on so many fronts here. They focused less on exploration and more on combat, positioning and platforming, while still making huge improvements in the writing department. They took their time, they did not let themselves be bothered by any internet discourse, culture war, or other nonsense, and just released a sublime game. One of the finest Metroidvanias of all time. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribe to my channel for more. Thank you for your attention.